So now that Abyss has been in comp for a bit, I've noticed a bunch of people seem to hate it. They hate mid, they think it's too lurky, they think it's too big, and apparently it's the worst map created since Breeze. And while I don't disagree with some of those points, I think not enough people are willing to learn how to play this map, and that just leads to more hate. So I've been making this guide that will hopefully help players like you not hate this map as much. I'll be going over the map's design and how to play it conceptually, how to attack and defend each site properly, how to play post-plant scenarios to convert rounds, and I'll go over the agents I think are best so far in the current meta. There are timestamps in the description if you want to skip to a specific part, or you can scrub through the video timeline to find what you want. Okay, so before we get into any sort of gameplay or I go into the map and show you how to use certain agents or how to specifically attack sites or anything like that, I want to talk about this section of the map here and just discuss the map conceptually for a second. I think the middle part of the map is the most important part of this entire map, and here's why. First, as a defender, if you don't control this part of the map, it makes it way more difficult for you to properly rotate if you have to rotate to a specific site. So for example, if the enemy here is pushing onto B, this Sova can't comfortably push through mid here, similar to Breeze if you think about it, right? So in Breeze, you have a top nest and you have that entire big area of the map in the middle. You want to make sure that you're controlling that so that you can comfortably rotate as quickly as you can to help your teammates out. It's a very similar concept here. If you don't control this area of the map, then it makes it much more difficult for you to confidently rotate. And what that ends up doing a lot of the time is forcing you to either take duels here as you rotate and get picked off, or take the safer route, which takes forever. Again, very similar to Breeze in that instance. If you look at a map like Ascent, if you're playing Tree, for example, and you want to contest mid, and then your teammate needs help on A, it's a very easy proposition to come back into Tree and be able to hold this angle for him and shoot the door and maybe potentially help with some utility, right? But if you look at Abyss, then that becomes much more difficult. Even if you're playing on the right side of the map that the hit is on, so if this Sova's over here, it's much more difficult for this Sova to sprint downstairs, come over here and help his teammate on site as fast as he can, right? Because it's a pretty large map. And then likewise, if the hit is actually on A, he either has to take duels in mid as he goes through, or he has to sprint through spawn, which takes forever. And by the time he gets here, the site's already taken. Now, conceptually and from a map design perspective, as an attacker, I think it's extremely important to make sure that you're controlling and showing presence here in mid for all the reasons that I just listed, right? If you're actually showing presence here and this Sova can't comfortably rotate, you're effectively cutting off an easy rotate for this Sova to get onto B to help his teammates out. And what that does is create a man disadvantage. And that's really the goal of this entire map as an attacker, is to spread the defense as thin as possible. So usually what you'll normally see, at least in Pro League, is you'll actually see a lot of Pro League players leave the middle of the map open and they'll put some utility here to just watch it so that they can actually have some sort of man advantage because of how big this map is and how difficult it is to actually rotate through mid. In ranked, that's obviously not the case. You'll usually see somebody playing mid, maybe nobody's playing mid or paying attention to it at all with any sort of utility, which is not the move. But again, as an attacker, think about this from a strategic point of view. If your team's starting to push up into B, right, and they're threatening the fact that they're coming into B, now your Jet here and your Cypher here are calming to their team, hey, there's heavy pressure B. If you're showing presence mid and this Sova starts peeking, and all you do, like, I'm not even exaggerating, you don't even have to try to get this pick on this Sova. All you have to do, genuinely speaking, is just show that you're here, tap a couple of times, keep him here, right? Because what that does is now, okay, if this Omen and KO want to move, they have to come all the way through spawn because they know somebody's here. Same thing here, they have to come all the way through spawn. And think about how much time it takes these two to rotate all the way through spawn to get there on this map in particular, and how quickly your team can take that site with the man advantage. So again, I think mid is one of the most important parts of this map, and it's going to be a lot of what I actually end up explaining in terms of how to attack certain sites and how to defend certain sites. Now, the last thing that I want to explain here that I think is important for both defensive teams and attacking teams to understand is that as teams potentially pressure or push up mid, what that ends up doing to a lot of defensive teams is force them to respect it. When you do pressure mid, and if you do more than pressure, so let's say you start to actually push mid here, right? Let's say your Cypher and your Astra are pushing mid. They've successfully kind of pushed these people back up off of their angles, and these two are kind of, or these three rather, are stuck over here on A. Let's say they put something like an Astra smoke over here, for example, and now these guys can't really push that without potentially getting punished. Think about this from the defender's perspective, right? If you're an attacker, you've now successfully gotten Jet to focus on you because this is an additional threat, right? So as your team scales, right, as your team gets onto B, this Jet has a decision to make. Do I want to focus on site with my Cypher, or do I want to try to get these picks here in mid because they've threatened that pressure and they've started pushing up? So again, mid's not just important because it cuts defender rotates off. That's pretty obvious and self-explanatory. Mid is important because you're forcing these people on site that are playing pretty comfortable angles to make a decision about which angle they actually want to hold. hold. In this case, this Jet might very realistically want to hold mid, which leaves Cypher entirely alone on site and not able to actually push. And then likewise, it makes it so that these guys now have to either rotate through here or take fights in mid. Again, the name of the game in Abyss is to make the site hit unfavorable for the defensive team. And in this case, the best way to do that is to pressure and show presence in mid to force the defenders to not have the ability to take man advantage or numbers advantage on the sites themselves. Okay, so this is a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about conceptually, right? I know that it's a pro league game and this isn't always going to be how your ranked games play, but I just wanted to illustrate exactly what I'm talking about when I mean pressuring mid is super important and contesting and keeping mid is also super important. So in this round, you're going to see Harbor Wall come out through mid. You're going to see a trip right here in Library Hall. And from there, at one point, you're going to see Omen actually come up here, pressure this Library Hall and shoot out the trip. And once he shoots that out, I want you to be very, very aware of what's happening right here with the 3 players playing it. You're going to see Harbor look this way. You're going to see Jet look this way. And you're going to see Cypher look this way. And in my opinion, Crew took way too long to hit. As soon as they broke that trip, they should have instantly blasted out onto site because you had a huge amount of pressure being given in mid. And so a lot of players were looking over at mid. And then in addition to that, I want you to look at this Sova as well. Once the hit starts to happen, you're going to notice how the Sova actually does not come in through mid here. He comes in through spawn because he knows that there's the potential for somebody to be mid. So again, this is just a good round illustrating what I'm talking about. Crew end up losing this round. Again, I think it's just because of the missed time of the push. But again, just focus on the Omen here. Focus on everybody looking at mid once the Omen breaks the trip, and then focus on how the Sova rotates through spawn and not through mid.
Meltzer's taking so much space. You've got the trip to provide a little bit of safety. Nothing really to follow up behind it though.
And he hears all these footsteps. He knows there's so many players lean towards B. Surely this is a call back all the way to A site. You have all the info in the world that 2 players rotated into that B site. There's no way they face check this still.
They might try. The knife is out, the harbor wall's up, and Kesnit is in. I mean, a relentless approach, I guess, but it's just not working out in their favor, though. The 1-for-1 might be enough. They're fully committing onto this. The spike is just not getting its way out onto site, and there's really nobody else there. The defense has held the line.
Okay, so let's talk about ideal plant scenarios. Something that I see a lot of teams do, and especially in ranked, is they come up here, they take control of backside here, and then they plant directly here. That's not bad if you're really in a bind and you can't actually plant default. Like let's say, for example, you're getting swarmed, or maybe it's like a 1v3, 1v2. You definitely do want to plant here in those situations. But in an ideal plant situation, the path that you want to take is realistically take control of this area right here. You want to work your way to the back. You don't want to plant here. And as you take control of this backside, so normally this is going to be smoked about right there. You want to make sure that you can push people off of the stairs angle before you fully take control and play your plant. So a lot of people are going to be playing right here. A lot of people are going to be playing back here. So let's just say you're Omen, for example, right? I'm just throwing ideas out at the wall, but let's say you haven't used your blind yet. If you want to make sure that you are playing the most ideal post-plant situation possible, you have to find a way to push them back out of this spot. You have to be able to take control of this area entirely. Maybe not entirely, like if you want to put a smoke here, that's totally fine. But you want to make sure that that's the path that you take. That's, again, the ideal path that you want to take is come up here. You can take control of all of this by coming through this secured area. And then you can take the fights from here without having to worry about the heaven peak. Of course, in ranked, there's always the possibility that, you don't think anybody's going to peek you from heaven. And you think that there's going to be teammates holding you or holding your heaven from here. And then somehow, some way, because nobody's actually paying attention, this person just comes out here and just starts tapping you because nobody's actually paying attention. Totally fair. I understand the potential criticism there. But I'm talking about in ideal situations. That's how you want to push and position yourself on this map, is come through lane here and then eventually push these people off of that site or off of this stairs area so that you can eventually work your way to play default, which is right here. You always want to try your best to play default in this situation because it allows room for the most possible post-plant scenarios for your team. So let's say you planted right here.
Drop the spike.
Let's say that's the spike and it's planted. That gives your team the ability to play main. You really can't play from here, to be fair, but it does give you the ability to play from heaven as well, right? So if you want to play here, you definitely can. If you want to have a late lurk, which again, I've explained and shown just how important it is to take advantage of mid, you absolutely have the ability to take advantage of a late lurk here, right? So you're taking your late lurk, you come this direction. It's very easy for you to just peek this, make sure nobody's doing anything with it, or if somebody's defusing, Same thing with heaven. If you've got a late lurk and you come from heaven, it's very easy to come here and see this direction as well, right? So again, just always try your best to take that path onto site. In some instances, it's not going to work out. But what I see way too often that is usually not going to work out for you is smoking this off and coming over here and fighting here. The reason you don't want to do this is because they can come out from anywhere over here, right? So they can come out left side, they can come out right side. And so you're exposing yourself to more potential angles by coming this direction versus coming through lane and pushing the stairs this way and pushing them off of stairs so that you can take control of the actual site. All right, so let's talk about A side. Regardless of your utility, again, I want to make that very clear. This is regardless of utility. So of course, utility can completely change the way that you play around, and it's a very dynamic game. And so you need to take that into account. But from a general map perspective, right, from like a conceptual perspective, how you push this site is a little bit easier, I think, than B. But still, I feel like a lot of people struggle with A and they don't really know where to take space on A. And I see a lot of people do this. They come out, there's usually smoke somewhere right here. I'll see a lot of people come out here and they'll expose themselves to every angle, right? So they'll expose themselves to heaven, they'll expose themselves to this part of the site, and they'll expose themselves to the back right of site, or bridge, whatever you want to call it. The reason that that is not ideal is, one, you're exposed to a bunch of different angles, and two, it's very difficult to confidently take fights from bridge, right? You're not in an area where you can confidently counter strafe, or not counter strafe, but confidently strafe as you shoot. Sure, you can do this, but it's not something you want to be doing. So you'll usually have to push yourself past bridge in order to take fights, at which point, again, exposed to more angles. So I'll show you a heat map in a second of how this all actually plays out statistically. But what you want to do when you're pushing A site is actually hug the left side of the site and take control of the back left corner of site. So this is also usually going to be smoked off here as well. So if you have that smoke here, you can confidently come this direction. But think about how many less angles you're exposing yourself to coming out of this smoke. Not many people are going to push out that far from back site to peek this angle. You're going to be smoked off here in heaven, right? So really the only thing you have to focus on is right here. Whereas, again, for perspective, if you come out here, you have to focus on here because people do come that far out into this corner over here. And then same thing over here, you're going to have to be careful with all of the areas over on the right-hand side. So the more control or the more space that you can take from this perspective right here, where you're able to clear backside fully, now what that does is give your team that's pushing bridge a better ability to confidently take the space back here because they don't have to worry about the angles from this backside of the site. They only have to worry about taking the fights in the back corners here in security. So again, very, very simple. Just try your best to hug this left side. That doesn't mean the whole team needs to be doing this, by the way. Like, it is still good to have maybe one person play this area just to make sure nobody's peeking or pushing out a bridge. You don't want 5 people just, la-di-dying their way over into left side of site here. But you do want to make sure that that is the optimal path for you. Okay, so I don't want to just say all these things and say, like, trust me, bro, like, that's my source, right? I want to pull up this heat map of the first 10 seconds of any round within all ranks to kind of illustrate what I actually mean in terms of how to attack these sites and why you should be attacking this direction. So what you're seeing here, this is A site, and then this is B site. What you're seeing here is where people die in the first 10 seconds of a round. Again, this is across all ranks, and so a lot of the times you'll see most rounds end within the first 30 seconds. This is not a perfect indicator, but it's a good indicator of how you should be pushing. Notice how on A site, there's a higher likelihood, essentially, is what you're seeing here, of getting access to this side of the site versus getting access to this side of the site. So if you think about it, right, the more people that are dying over here and the further out that they're getting and the further out that this heat map is going means you're able to take more space of this area before you're dying, right? So same thing here on this side, your heat map ends a lot sooner than the heat maps do over here for the left side of the site. So again, in theory, what that means is that people are able to get more space or more control of the site before they die. Same thing over here. You'll see it's much more minor here, but you'll see that most people die about right here in the first 10 seconds as they push. And then that line goes up just a little bit as they're pushing the left side of the site. Again, this isn't a perfect indication of how you should be attacking and why you should be attacking in terms of control, because it's only the first 10 seconds of the round. but I do think it's a good indicator of the fact that, generally speaking, this is where you want to be pathing as you get onto a site from an attacking perspective. And you'll notice this across every single map as well, right? Like the most common paths, the ones that are the safest to take, are the ones that people die in the least amount of times before they actually get further out into the site, right? This is a pretty common theme across all maps, but for Abyss, I'm sure that as time goes on, you'll notice more of this trend where more people are going to be pushing out onto the left. Same thing for left lane over here on B as well. Okay, so let's talk post plant on A. It really does depend. I'm being so serious when I say on A in particular, it really depends on the scenario. But for the most part, in an ideal situation, what you want to be doing is planting right here on default. So you can actually get the spike on this ledge by looking in that direction as you plant right here in that corner. And once you do plant on that, that means that now their effective radius for a defuse is essentially from here to like, well, from like here to here. And that gives you the ability to now come back in here and play the spam game that you see in like Sunset, for example, right? So on Sunset, I think on B side, this happens all the time. You'll plant on stairs and then they'll just sit there and spam. So that's not the only way to play this. I do think that it is the most common way that people are going to be playing this from an attacking perspective, where they'll plant somewhere in default here like this, just run back here and then play A main because it's the easiest spam of your life, quite honestly. Like really, you're looking at like the smallest possible radius that a player can actually get access to that spike. So if that's something that is not happening often enough, or you're not able to do that for whatever reason, again, I think on A side in particular, it's very scenario dependent. You really do want to make sure that you're staggering the enemy's ability to get back onto site. So let's say you have, heaven covered with the smoke or something. You want to make sure that you are not giving them easy access to this back area of the map, whether it's by playing up here, playing over here on bridge, for example. Your goal is really to stagger. And so what I mean by staggering is the defender is going to have to come back in here in stages. They can't just come back here and run their way back in because you're not playing it, giving them a bunch of extra time to potentially defuse, right? They're going to have to one by one deal with anybody that's playing backside, right? So they're going to have to clear this angle, then slowly clear this angle, and then they're going to have to slowly clear this angle. And if there's people playing in those angles, then that makes the retake a lot more difficult for them. So again, if you're not able to play spam game, your real only other option is to control the map as much as you can. Again, I think your best bet on A in particular is plant the default right there, play the spam game, and just try to make sure that you understand where you're spamming as best as you can, right? So this is really the only radius that you should be focused on. You shouldn't really be shooting like way out here, or you don't even need to shoot over here because they can't defuse from over there, right? That's the beauty of having this ledge that goes down and they have to fall with it, right? And I talked about post plant a little bit earlier with B. Like I said, ideally you should be planting here in default, maybe not specifically there if you don't want to. You could also plant here. That gives you maybe a little bit more flexibility from a lurking perspective. There are scenarios where you simply just have to plant a left lane here on B, and that's okay. I think what you want to make sure that you're doing is, one, you're planting as close to this ledge as humanly possible. You can even get it on the ledge. You just don't want to plant out in the open or over here on this wall. If you plant on this wall, let me just throw it this direction. If you plant on that wall, it completely eliminates, for the most part, your ability to effectively take this fight, right? You have to really swing out into this ledge here in order to actually take this fight if they're playing the front side of the spike. And then likewise, you're opening yourself up to way more angles that you have to hold here as you peek. Whereas if you plant the left side right here, there's really not as many angles that you have to peek. So that it's much more difficult for the defenders to cover for the person that's actually trying to defuse the spike. Again, I would say try your best not to deal with this. And again, the way you do that is to come out through back lane and push people off of stairs. And once you get control of this area and you're comfortable, you can start planting here. And if you do plant back here, once you get it either on the ledge or as close to the wall as possible, your goal at this stage really should be, in my opinion, to control the site as long as you possibly can, while having maybe 1 or 2 players playing back in main. You don't want to give them free access to all of this area, because what that does is force you into one angle specifically. You can't really hold this at all other than here. So it's very easy for the defenders to sit here and make sure that they're holding you from heaven or from lane. So if you do plant back here, I would recommend as a team or as a individual, if you're solo queuing, try to keep control of as much of site as possible. Again, this idea of staggering, right? If they come out of stairs and they have to deal with a fight here and then they have to deal with another fight over here, it takes longer for them to get access to that area that's a little bit easier for them to contest. Whereas if you plant right here, it's very, very common to just sprint your way back into main and play it from either main or heaven, because these are very safe corners for you to play and very easy things for you to spam, right? There's not as many angles that you're gonna have to cover, because usually this is gonna get smoked off. And so look at what you don't have to cover anymore. You can just spray your way through the smoke. Whereas with here, yes, they might, whoops, bad smoke, there it goes. But you get the point. If they smoke off right here, this is an easier spam as well. So they usually don't want to smoke that, they'll want to hold you. So again, just to recap, if you plant right here, usually the preferred method is play your main and your heaven positions and spam. Maybe play 1 or 2 on site if you want to. Whereas if you plant here, you should flip that. You should play more on site and maybe 1 or 2 back in main. Okay, so like I mentioned on defense, again, your real goal here is to not spread yourself too thin. This is a massive map. And so rotating from spawn or even through mid is going to take you forever. And so usually what you're going to see and what you're seeing more and more of as the meta starts to kind of creep in is actually just playing for info in mid. I'm going to show you a clip in a few seconds of how that works, but just to kind of show you in game specifically, something that you'll start to see a lot of, and that's pretty common nowadays, is playing your KJ turret here in mid, because that holds both top catwalk and mid library. I think that generally speaking, what you want to do again is not spread yourself too thin. And so if you are playing as a KJ or a Cypher or some sort of Sentinel, you're going to want to try to play information gathering utility in mid and leave mid alone outside of that, right? So let your utility do that information gathering for you. And then if you need to from there, start to look into mid, right? However, if you don't do that, let's say you don't have anyone mid or you don't have a bot mid and you're using it here or whatever, right? Like this is a terrible setup, but let's just for the sake of example, you're like throwing your stuff on site here. Sure, you can get information on B, but what that does now is it forces one of your teammates to have to come over here, play mid, jump peek this, spot everything, take these fights, and now they have a harder time getting onto site to help you because it takes forever to get back onto site, right? And if they chose the wrong side of mid to watch, so if they're holding this area and the site hit is actually A, it's very queasy, right? It's very uncomfortable to come out here from where we were just now, having to come over here and watch these areas because of the presence of the mid lurk, right? Not to mention the fact that it takes forever, right? Like look at how long it takes me just to get here. The people are already on site that are attacking. So again, I think your best bet as a defensive team, if you want to make sure that you're playing as best as you can on the site specifically, is to play some sort of information gathering utility here in mid. And again, I'll show you how that works out in a pro league setting in a second. Okay, so this is a perfect illustration of what I mean by not spreading yourself too thin. So in this round, G2 plays the extremities of the map with their actual man advantages. And then they use KJ utility, or this could have been Cypher trips or whatever else, right, to gather passive information, right? This could have been a chamber trip in ranked, really up to you, right? But the idea is that you don't want to commit any members to mid until you know that there is somebody in mid. My recommendation would be to have some sort of utility here in mid as maybe a KJ or a Cypher, and then just watch how G2 really never comes here at all, right? Like they don't come here to clear it. They don't come here to rotate. They really just leave it alone. And they rotate through spawn back and forth when they need to, in order to not give any sort of information or potential ability for this Cypher here to get a pick as they rotate. Again, I just want you to be really cognizant of how they're playing these outer extremities of the map in particular, to keep that man advantage. Again, that's the real point here, is you don't want to spread yourself too thin on a map like this because of how big it is.
Trying to figure out how to get a good, solid hold on that post plant. But focus towards that B site again, but a little more lingering across the map already. You see from Boostio towards mid with the Outlaw. And now they're watching left side. That's a dart.
Don't know if that's too low or something.
I think it was. I mean, it'd come up and hit the back of your head maybe and show you.
At least if anything, though, you see the difference on the defensive side once again. This time, though, towards A.
Does look like it'll work.
The difference that you see here from the smokes that are being thrown are actually a lot deeper for G2, so they don't want to concede the entrance of the A side. They want to fight for orb control at the same time and not giving the opportunity for 100 Thieves to really push up. And that really is throwing 100 Thieves for a loop.
Yeah.
If you're looking at where the deaths are, they're pretty still towards the attacker spawn. And nobody's able to cross that line of scrimmage towards that side. Look at that utility from the Killjoy. Everything is still up.
Yeah. And we also see, you know, Josh RT just told us they're playing this wall comp that goes through here, causing the attackers to have to run through multiple walls depending on where they're coming from, at least twice.
Yeah.
So again, I know it's super weird to tell somebody not to play mid, and I'm not saying not to play it on any round, right? In some cases, it's totally fine to show presence here. It's fine to play it. It's just that generally speaking, and for the most part, you're going to convert, I think, more rounds by not trying to actively keep this space here because of how big the map is. And that's very different from other maps that you're used to, right? Like Ascent or Icebox, you have to have that heavy presence in mid. And maps like Breeze, you really don't have to have as much heavy presence in mid. Maybe just come back and peek it every now and then. But the difference between Abyss and Breeze is that you can very comfortably and confidently hold all of mid with something easy like a KJ turret, even, you know, something like an alarm bot here, because most people aren't going to make this jump, right? This is a death wish, one, because you might fall, and two, because you make noise. There's no way to make this jump without making noise. So again, it's different from how you normally play maps, but I think mid here is very confidently held by your utility. Okay, so let's talk about A defense. Like I mentioned on attack, the ideal pathing here is not going through bridge, but rather coming in through this left side, hugging the wall as much as you can. Of course not, you don't have to be on the wall, but just hugging this left side and taking control of the back left corner of the site. So, you know, on the opposite end, if you're on defense, that means that you want to prevent them from taking that path. And so there's plenty of ways to do that. I'm not going to get into the world of, like, you know, setups and lineups and potential trips and walls and all that other stuff. I will explain what I think the comps are for each role, but you can go and like look at the endless amounts of, you know, YouTube videos on how to do specific setups for each site, because that would take me forever to do for every single operator. And this is a map guide, not an agent guide. But again, your goal is to force them to actually go towards bridge. Whether that means as a duelist taking these fights and winning them, right? That's definitely an option. That could also mean as a defender, if you're a KJ, having some sort of setups that really disincentivizes them from taking this space early on, right? So that's a very realistic option where as soon as they start actually getting onto site, if they see these two mollies, it's very unlikely that they're going to want to sit here and wait, because this smoke is eventually going to go down. And even if the smoke doesn't go down, they can get peeked. And so it's very unlikely they're going to push that. And so that's going to kind of incentivize them, right? That's the idea here, is incentivizing them to push into this direction. So as people scale in, if you can keep this control, heaven doesn't matter to you, right? What does heaven matter to you if you're keeping this control and you're not dying, right? Once you die, okay, in that instance, for sure, you might want to tell your teammates, hey, it's very possible that they go up into A heaven. But playing heaven here is not going to be as effective as holding this angle here specifically and preventing them from even taking heaven to begin with. And this is a much higher conversion rate in terms of fighting, in terms of getting picks, in terms of preventing them from planting in the default spot than playing in heaven is. All right, so let's talk about defense on B. The biggest thing here, again, I mean, I'm going to be a broken record here, but if attacking B means pushing back left lane and then taking control of stairs from back left lane, that means as a defender, you don't want them to take this control, right? You want to keep them back off of this. And so you want to do your best to either play backside here, which I'm going to be honest is very difficult to do because this is an easy utility dump, right? You can get a breach aftershock here, you can get a raise nade here. There's so much utility that can be dumped on you here, from even with, you know, KJ mollies, KO mollies, Phoenix mollies, Brim mollies, Viper, like there's so much that can prevent you from playing this effectively. But as a defender, you want to make sure that you're able to keep this space as best as you can. So if that means putting a mid-site smoke right here so that you can confidently take this fight a little bit more aggressively without having to worry about main or heaven, that's totally fine, right? I would encourage you to play more mid-site smokes here. If you've got a harbor, you can, you know, wall this entire area. If you've got an omen, you can place a smoke from here to kind of block off this area and this area from being able to peek you. But your goal as a defender should be to not let them take all of this space and then scale in to stairs or take control of this. So you don't want to be playing back here, right? Like this is not your bread and butter as a defender, because it gives them way too much ability to take space as an attacking team. You want to be playing, maybe start off over here, right? You can start off on this side and that's fine. Or you could even play an aggressive angle here and prevent them from taking this control here, because this is really the only way that people are going to be taking this lane here. It's very uncommon for people to path from main into backside. People will do it, but you can take an aggressive fight here without getting peeked from main. So no matter how you do it, if you smoke here, you're more aggressive on lane. Again, your goal is really to force them to plant back here. Like that is your goal, is put so much pressure on them that they have no opportunity to scale up and they have to be forced to plant here. As a defending team, playing post plant here versus playing post plant here is so much easier for you and your team. Because think about it from your perspective. Let's say you're in heaven and they planted back lane. Having to clear all of this is fine, right? Like you can smoke these areas off, you can run this direction, and all you have to really focus on is hell, right? Because if these are smoked off, you don't have to really worry about clearing these angles. You can just come over here, get into lane, and then focus on this one angle as a team, right? However, if they plant it over here, it's very, very difficult to do anything about the spam game that they're gonna hit you with over here in main and heaven. And you have to worry about lurks now because it's very, very easy for them to come out of here, very easy for them to come out of here. And so again, just generally speaking, your goal should be to push them and incentivize them. I keep using that word because I think it's a good one. Incentivize them to plant the spike back here in lane specifically. Now let's talk about the situations where you can't incentivize them to plant back here. Let's say they do plant right here in main. Well, your job now is to send one of your players on a defensive team all the way down here to pressure main. So a lot of people think that this window exists for the sole purpose of rotations, and that's probably also true, right? Like that's probably a fair assessment, but it also exists to prevent the spam game. That's why this is here. This is something that works equally for both defenders and attackers in a post plant situation, especially. So in a post plant situation, you're going to have a lot of people playing main, and you're going to have a lot of people playing heaven or nest, whatever you want to call it. And so as a defensive team, if you can confidently understand that there is no mid-level lurk, then you want to make sure that you're pushing over here and applying pressure. You don't have to kill, right? You don't have to stop them from doing anything other than show your presence and hide, right? Just make sure that they are focused on you and that their crosshairs are broken from this default spot onto you instead. So again, as a defensive team, if you notice that they planted default, your best bet in a post plant situation there is really to just come through this window and try your best to apply pressure from here. A lot of people forget that this window exists in a post plant situation, especially on defense. And what they'll end up doing is just flooding the site because it's the easiest thing to do, right? Like it really is one of the easiest things to do. So if you notice that they're planting and they're planting default and you have the foresight to sprint through mid here, and you have the ability to do it, I would recommend that you do it to make sure that you can apply some pressure mid for your team to confidently retake that site. Now, if they did plant here and you're a defender, I don't think I have to give you too much of a guide here. As long as you can get over here onto this section of the map, really it's a tap and hold game, right? So if you have two people and you're playing against two or three others on attack, you can tap the spike, have one of your teammates or buddies hold for you, or you can both hold. Really, that's all you're doing here is you tap the spike and you hold this angle. There are instances, of course, again, Valorant is a dynamic game. There are instances where a defending or an attacking team can come up here as you're tapping and holding and they can kill you from here. But really, your goal is focus on this angle. And then you might have this additional angle to worry about. Very rare that they're going to wrap around through the back of the site from main or from stairs. And so there's not much to really guide you on here. Realistically, you're tapping, you're holding, or you're trying to get them to peek and then killing them before you can, get the spike diffuse off. Now let's talk about retaking A in a post plant situation. So as you're retaking A, right, there's, again, I'm not going to cover every single potential scenario, right? Because we could be here for days just talking about how to, properly use utility to clear the right lane here, focus on isolating the single first, and then that would take forever. My intention here is to kind of show you once you have the opportunity to get into the post plant, to actually, tap the spike or hold the spike. As a defensive team, you're going to have to be ready for the A main game where they're just going to spam, right? Normally, at least on Sunset, what you're going to see a lot of people do is smoke this area in particular instead of smoking the spike. What I would rather have you do is either smoke the spike and tap while your teammates hold for you, or once this smoke goes down, I'll show you in a second, or you want to isolate the fights here on A main. So something you'll see a lot of more, recently in the meta is smoking one side here. So smoke off the right side fight the left side. And once you know that left side is clear, then you can start to tap the bomb because you can take this space a little bit more confidently, right? So instead of just smoking this area here where really they can play anywhere back here, you want to isolate one side here. So you can, if you want to, realistically, you can isolate this side. It's not as effective, but you can, and you can fight here. I would rather see you isolate this right side because your team has an easier angle to hold from here. And once you smoke off this right side here, you clear this left side, you can now take this space as they're trying to scale back in through that smoke, right? So think about this from the attacking perspective. They have the spike down, they've been smoked off. They now have to push through here. Look at all of the area that they've just exposed themselves to without knowing where you might be, right? Whereas if you don't smoke that right side in particular, they can confidently say, you're not here, you're not there, you're not here, you're not there. But if you've got this smoke, shoot, like look at how much I have to cover now, right? So again, isolate one side, fight the other side, get rid of anyone that's there, and then hold this smoke while your person diffuses. And then you could, if you really want to, you could always go for the old smoke spike, tap it, and then, you know, turn around or whatever. But if they're planting correctly and the spike is up here, you're basically chalked. It's really difficult to get a smoke diffuse off in this particular instance. On Sunset, it's a little bit easier, but on this, it's a lot harder. So I would recommend isolating one side and fighting the other. Okay, so let's talk Sentinels on this map. You know, roll by roll, I'm gonna go over who I think is the strongest on this map and how you can potentially play each site to make sure that you're giving your team the best ability to actually win the rounds and convert the rounds. So I'm gonna talk about B first because I think it's the most difficult site to hold in my opinion. And realistically, you're gonna want a KJ or a Cypher on B in particular. You're not gonna want these guys to play A. I know that a lot of people like to put a Cypher trip like right here, and that's fine, but really he's much better off being used on B, and same thing for KJ on B as well. The way that you're going to want to play these guys on B is actually not to dump all of your utility on B, but rather have something in mid that lets you freely ignore mid and still get information. So for Cypher, that means having some sort of a tripwire here. So you could put one, you know, here, for example. I think there's really only one area that you can kind of place this trip where it's, you know, waist level so that people can't jump over it. You don't have to worry about putting a trip on this side because again, they jump over this. You should be able to pick up that sound cue either from here in heaven or even from here in stairs. You should be able to pick up that sound cue as well. So you want to either play a trip here if you're Cypher, or for example, if you're KJ, like we saw in the pro match, you want to put some sort of an alarm bot here, or you can put a turret that is focused on watching all of this, right? So the turret here is really going to give you a sense of if anybody's playing for this door, or if they're scaling up through library hallway as well. So again, that's where you want to place your information gathering utility, right? Either one trip or potentially a camera. I would rather have a camera on B, but you could put a camera here, a Cypher cam, and then either an alarm bot or a turret from KJ specifically. On site, like I mentioned, again, you want your utility to disincentivize them from pushing into main here. So what I mean by that is you don't want them to just fully get access to this. You want them to have to come back here and stay back here. And so if that's your goal, you want to make sure that you're putting your utility here in a way that is kind of forcing them to, even if they're main, to come back here. So if you're KJ, for example, again, I'm not going to get into like specifics of lineups and all that and how you're going to actually play stuff, but you know, putting your mollies here to stop them from pushing straight in through main and kind of forcing them to want to scale in through this back site, and then maybe placing like a turret over here, whatever it is, right? Again, look up the best setups for KJ on B, but again, your goal is to deter the attacking team from pushing here and instead force them to push into back lane. And if you're Cypher, again, you want to do the same thing. If you, let's say, for example, want to disincentivize them from pushing over onto B main or through B main, you can put Cypher cages like a one-way over here and then another one here. Nobody's going to want to push that, I promise you. Whoever pushes into these Cypher cages, they deserve whatever rank they're going to get because they're brain dead. You want to make sure that you are disincentivizing them by showing that you are here somewhat. You want to disincentivize them by showing that you are still potentially back here, or just stopping them from pushing by putting, you know, a trip here, cages here. Again, this is gonna, once they see those things pop or they get hit by a trip, they're gonna want to instead start pushing this way, right? So the person in left lane here, by whatever this is called, is gonna push left lane anyway. And then the person main, once they see something like these cages go up, they're either gonna push left lane or they're gonna try and scale up into this top area of the map here instead. But again, that's your goal. Push them to the back of the site. And then at that point, your goal is to keep them there as best as you possibly can. Now let's talk about Sentinel picks over on A. Like I mentioned, I don't think that KJ or Cypher are good on A. I don't think that their abilities really help you on A all that much. I do think that Deadlock is actually a great pick for A. And I'll give you a perfect example of how that works now. Deadlock's wall is really good. I think it's one of the best pieces of utility in the game. I'm not saying that you can't throw this main. You definitely can. This is a pretty good spot to throw it. But again, if your goal is to disincentivize them from pushing and taking this back left of site, you can absolutely throw a wall here and prevent them from taking both heaven control and left side of site control, right? Again, I don't even know what the call out is here, to be honest, but this back left lane that you see the deadlock in, putting a wall right here disincentivizes them from pushing and taking both of these places of control. And it gives you, the deadlock, the ability to focus on this area of the map. So again, you are pushing them this way, which is uncomfortable for the attacker. And now you are taking a much more comfortable fight. If you don't want to put her wall there, I totally understand that. It's a very big piece of utility and using it there may not be something you prefer. Putting her sonic sensor right here is actually super, super good. It forces them to either have to, again, push as you condition them, right, round to round. They're going to say, I don't want to push that sonic sensor. That's annoying. So I'm going to start pushing bridge. And if they do still push this sonic sensor, they have a decision to make, right? Do I shoot the sonic sensor out? Or do I peek this person and try to get the pick before the sonic sensor goes off? Almost every single time, you're going to win that fight, right? I'm not trying to get into the world of explaining exactly where you want your setups. What I'm just trying to illustrate is this idea that as they're scaling into A, the more favorable fight for you is this one as a defender. So you want to stop them or disincentivize them from pushing this left side with any sort of utility that you have possible. And that way, as they're pushing into bridge, you're taking much easier fights because it's harder for them to hold so many angles as they scale out, right? Your only fight here as a defender is this angle, right? Think about that. You don't have to expose yourself to anything else. Like, this is the easiest fight as a defender to take. You're just looking at bridge. But think about this from an attacker's perspective. If you're pushing up into bridge here and you get this far out, you can get peeked from here. You can get peeked from a swing out here. You can get peeked from somebody swinging from back here. You have so much more to cover, right? But as a defender, you realistically only have that. That's it. You just have to look there. You can't get traded from anywhere else, especially if you've got a utility that is preventing them from pushing this area of the map, right? So again, I just think, generally speaking, Deadlock is really, really good for A site if you do want to play Deadlock or a Sentinel on A. I would not recommend playing KJ or Cypher on A. I don't think that their utility is really set up to really hold this site down super well. Now let's talk about the Sentinel role on attack. I think KJ and Cypher here are perfectly set up to be roamers and late lurks. You don't want to do that every single round. Obviously, you're going to start to give away your strat and your plan, but generally they are perfect lurkers for this map. It's a very easy map to lurk around. A lot of people will describe this map as very lurky, and that is true. It is very easy to lurk up this map. You can come over here behind library, listen to every single human being sprint their way through mid, and then just slowly creep your way in and get an easy flank. And if early enough in the round, you shoot out this door here, and then your team eventually does a sight hit later in the round, it's very easy to lurk up these stairs and in through here, and then right click with your knife out on this door here, and then you're in already. Realistically, you should be lurking here and holding your utility as much as possible for your team to be able to control this area of the map as they're pushing one side or the other. As a Deadlock, really, if you are going to play Deadlock on this, because again, I don't think there's many other Sentinels that I think are going to be good picks on this map. I don't think Sage is a great pick on this map. I don't think Chamber is a super good pick on this map either. Could be good if he, gets buffed a little bit in the future. Maybe he gets like an additional trip or something, but for now, I don't think he's that great. So if you're playing the Deadlock pick, you should be focused on all the advice you've heard up until now, which is on attack, you want to make sure that you're taking this space and taking this control. So if that means, for example, using a grav net back here to keep this person that's playing back left site from doing anything productive, great. Use that information or use that utility to push that a little bit more confidently, right? If your team is hitting B site and they're doing that pathing that I'm talking about, where you're pushing this back left lane and then you're trying to take this control and keep them on stairs and push them back from stairs. Okay, great. Then use something like your barrier mesh back here on stairs to keep them there for a while your team kind of scales and pushes up properly, right? Your goal here as an attacking Deadlock is really to just kind of heed the advice that I've been giving so far and use your utility as Deadlock to follow that advice or follow that direction as best as you possibly can as you're attacking onto a site. You shouldn't be lurking with Deadlock. You should be much more active in your attacks with Deadlock on your attacking rounds on Abyss. All right, so let's talk about controllers. Specifically, I'll start off on defense first. I think these are the 3 main controllers that you're going to see shake out across the meta, and this is already happening in pro play and in ranked as well. You're really mostly seeing Omen and Astra. You're probably going to see a lot of Clove, but I think Clove is an anomaly for basically every ranked match. She gets picked often as like an initiator slash duelist slash everything else because she's very fun to play and very easy to play. But as far as like actual controller mains, like people who really do care about the controller role, Astra and Omen can smoke on any site in particular that they need to as quickly as they need to. And I think that Harbor is very effective on attack in particular. I think he's a little less effective on defense, and that's probably why you're not going to see him picked a lot in ranked. If you do want to try him out, I think he's good on attack. So on defense, of course, you want to be smoking your default smokes, right? So like if you notice they're pushing A, you can put an Omen smoke here or an Astra smoke here or put an Harbor wall here. Same thing for main here. If they're pushing and they haven't gotten on the site yet, I think it's very easy to come out here and play this with the default smokes. Something that I think that people are going to need to start learning a lot of on this map in particular, especially for defense, again, is to try and dissuade the attacking team from taking the space that they need to plant the way that they want to plant. So by that, I mean, let's say you're Omen and you're playing on A and you notice that your team is starting to get hit on B. Putting some sort of mid-site smoke here for your team to be able to confidently keep them back here, right? So think about, let's say you have a teammate here that's playing stairs or maybe they're playing back B here and they're getting hit. Putting this smoke here gives them the flexibility to play wherever they need to be playing. So you want to make sure that you're cognizant of that. I'm not here to tell you where in particular you want to place your smokes, but getting comfortable as a controller main on Abyss with mid-site smokes is going to be super important. So this is a good one. You can also one-way this right here, which prevents the popular peek. You're going to see this a ton in ranked where they'll kind of play right here and they'll peek this direction. This one-way completely destroys that entire philosophy, and now they're kind of stuck just looking in this direction, and it's good for your team. You want to make sure that they're peeking that so you can try to get that pick before they actually start pushing it. Everything I'm saying for Omen can definitely apply for Astra. You can always make sure that you're smoking main, but also putting mid-site presence or mid-site smokes on B or A. If we flip to attack here as a controller, if you're playing Harbor, you're going to want to go anywhere that your team goes. It's really difficult to play Harbor as anything other than an initiator with smokes for the most part because he is limited in where he can throw them from. So wherever your team goes, you want to be with them and playing with them as closely as possible. If that means throwing a wall out and curving it across here so that they can get access to all of sight, then that's fine. This is why I think he's particularly powerful, by the way, because if you remember, as attackers, what you want to do is kind of path this direction and you want to take this control right here, whereas Harbor basically prevents all of that from happening. It's where Harbor can really shine is in the use of his wall here where he can curve it, so he can really effectively give you all of this space here and you can confidently take anywhere in this site wherever you want. You can plant wherever you want because of the fact that you've already got all that space just by way of not having lines of sight, right? They could absolutely spray you, but that's why I think Harbor is so good on attack in particular. For Omen and Astra, I think you can play kind of the lurk role. I think Omen is really good to be the person that's playing the lurk role in mid. He can TP past any trip. He can smoke off any sort of KJ turret. He can TP past any alarm bot. He can also TP past this here and make less noise than if you were to just jump straight through it. I think it's really, really good for him to be playing this lurk role and making the pressure here. You just want to make sure that you're careful of not dying too early because then your team is without smokes. And then same thing goes for Astra. I do think she can play the lurk role pretty well. I think you're going to want to play her a little bit less lurky than Omen because her kit is very, very important for the post plant. Omen's is definitely important for the post plant as well, but her ability to use her suck and her stun on the bomb is very important. And so if you lurk and you're not able to actually use that utility, it's very difficult for you to, confidently keep this control on site or stop the enemy from playing that post plant more confidently. All right, so let's talk about duelists. The meta is still shaking out with duelists in particular. I think you're going to see a lot of different types of playbooks in terms of who's going to play what duelist on certain comps within the pro league and generally within ranked. But here are the 4 that I think are going to stabilize a bit. You're going to see a lot of Jet and ISO picks. And I think from a general ability to not just take space, but rotate as quickly as possible, you're going to see a lot of Neon and a lot of Yoru picks. So I'm going to start off with Neon and Yoru. I think really your goal as Neon or Yoru is to have the ability to quickly get to either side of the map that is necessary at that particular time. If you notice that there's a very heavy hit into B with, 4 or 5 man push and your team is calling it, Neon and Yoru both have the ability to very quickly get onto site to help their team without the need to have to push this contested or potentially lurk a player here in mid, right? So Neon can get from back A to back B or stairs on B within the matter of a few seconds. And then Yoru can do the same if they're playing in A and they're, holding a very aggressive angle. If they threw their TP back over here into B, they can very quickly get over here to help support their team. I think they're going to be pretty big in ranked in particular to give you that ability to actually rotate as quickly as possible. I want to be very clear though, do not play these agents unless you know what you're doing. They have a very high skill ceiling and it's very difficult to play them. And so if you don't know what you're doing with these, I wouldn't recommend playing them. I would maybe try playing them out in unrated, getting used to them, and then from there you can play them in ranked because otherwise your teammates are just going to flame you. I think Jett and ISO are the more approachable options here from a duelist perspective in ranked. I think ISO is really, really good to take really aggressive fights early on. And I think he's really good for retakes as well because his wall does help retake very effectively on B. There's a lot of open space on B. And so using his wall, for example, throwing his wall in a direction like this, where if you're in heaven, having it kind of block all of this direction here as you're scaling back in is huge. That gives you so much room to be able to scale back in through that wall and take control of anything that you need to take control of. And then I think for Jett mains, the goal here is really verticality. There's on B in particular, a lot of space for them to be able to play. If you're taking a really aggressive angle here, it's very easy to dash off into oblivion here over on the stairs side. If you're playing top heaven, it's very easy to dash back over here away from anybody that might be peeking this B main angle or this nest angle. And then same thing goes for here on A. I think she's going to have a field day with A for attacking, but on defense, I think it's really good that you can play this top area here with verticality and then dash back into cover here behind this big pillar. So let's flip this over into attack. Again, I think the name of the game on attack is to do what I said and take control of each of these sites in the proper pathing that I mentioned. I do not think that either one of these agents should be going into mid at all. I want to make that clear. This area of the map is off limits for duelists. You really shouldn't be pushing this area at all. You should be using your utility and the way that you can take control and take space on the sites directly. Unless there's a very specific mid push that you and your team want to hit, I think that's fine. But realistically, this is not your area. The only one I can make even a small argument for is ISO because of his wall. If you're pushing on the B site with somebody like Yoru, again, the ideal pathing here would be making sure that you control this space and then you push the enemy back off. And so he's very, very good for taking this backside control. Throwing a TP there, flashing in, TPing there is very, very simple. Again, that's an ideal scenario, right? Sometimes it's not going to work out, but he's very good at that specific type of pathing. And then he can help your team take control of this area by throwing either blinds out and then peeking this area, or throwing clones out, or even throwing a TP out here and making some sort of, brain dead cracked play. But generally speaking, I think Yoru's good for that. On A side, I think Yoru's pretty good at doing the exact same thing here. Taking control of back A, I think is going to be a lot easier for Yoru than it will be for somebody like Jett or ISO. So again, whether that means throwing a TP here and flashing and TPing in, or just scaling the left side of the wall here and flashing as you go through, I think Yoru's going to be very powerful for taking this control. I think Neon's going to be really good on this site because of her wall in particular on B. I think throwing her wall out on B is going to give you a lot of opportunity to take control of this area, like I'd mentioned so much, but in a way that's a little bit less conventional. So like I mentioned, you want to make sure you're taking control of backside here, but throwing Neon's wall right here gives you a little bit more flexibility to actually control this area of the map instead of having to just take this area of the map as well. Again, this is where utility starts to change the dynamics of a map and how it's played. And then on A site, I think her wall is also going to be very, very good for taking control of back A here. I don't think it's going to be good for anything on the right side here. It could be argued that you might want to throw her wall in this fashion in order to block that side while you scale here, which I think is completely fair. But realistically, I think a lot of higher level or more comfortable Neon picks are going to potentially throw walls like this. They're going to stun out of it and they're going to, sprint out of their wall and try to take control of this back left corner of A. For Jett on attack, 1000% want to take advantage of verticality here. I think Jett shines on this map when it comes to taking space on B and on A. It's very common for Jetts to smoke off on top of B pillar here and play this top site area so that she causes maximum chaos as her team scales in from every area of the map. And then again, same thing for A. I think it's very common for a lot of Jett mains to start smoking off this area here and then dashing into that smoke, creating that space. I think it's very safe here. And then her teammates can kind of flood in behind her however they want to. I think ISO is actually a sleeper pick on this map. I think he's really, really good because of his wall. His wall lets you really confidently take space and scale into a site very easily. So whether it's throwing the wall straight ahead like this in order to give you access to all of B main, or throwing the wall in this direction to prevent the person back A from peeking you and shooting you, there's so much that you can do with his wall as you're taking site. But I think ISO is actually going to be one of the stronger agents here if they can keep him in his current form. If they nerf him even further, then of course ISO is not going to be a good pick, but I think he is going to be a pick that you're going to see a little bit more of in ranked. Maybe not in Pro League, because again, Pro League, they have a completely different set of play styles and the way that they actually form comps. For ranked specifically, I think ISO is actually a great pick if used correctly with his wall, and even his undercut ability as well, being able to throw it here in order to kind of keep them from peeking you because of the fact that they're vulnerable now. And same thing for back B, throwing it back B, I think is going to be super good. So I think ISO is actually a really good pick on this map in particular. All right, and last but not least is the initiator role. Let's start off with defense. I think Sova is going to be much better suited on A. There's much less for his arrow to clear on A, whether it's throwing an aggressive arrow here in main. So for example, something that you'll see a lot of Sovas do is throw an arrow somewhere over here on this wall. And then likewise, if you want to wait for them to actually push out onto site, his dart is very, very good for the spam game. So for instance, let's say that they're planting over here on default here, and you have his dart, and you throw this dart up against this wall up here on the top. This is something you'll see in Pro League all the time. It's not very common for enemies or attackers to be looking at this specific area as you throw that dart. And so you're going to get a lot of scans and easy sprays through smokes here because you're usually going to be smoked off here in heaven. So Sova's a really good pick to be playing heaven here instead of back A site, where you might want to play more like a Sentinel or a controller, for example. The other two agents that I think you're going to see a good bit of, and that you are seeing a good bit of, are KO and Gecko. I think you're seeing Gecko more than you're seeing KO because Gecko is really good for the ability to plant. However, I think KO is actually going to be a sleeper pick for a lot of initiators, especially in ranked. A big part of the reason I think KO is going to be good on a B and A, either side I think he's going to be good on, is because, again, I keep mentioning it, but that pathing, right? If they're playing to take back left lane and pushing up through B and stopping you from playing over here in stairs, KO is a great agent to stop them from making this push, right? Think about it. You have fragment, so you can keep them here for a hot minute until your team continues to rotate. You have flashes to toss back here to, again, keep them back here as your team continues to rotate. And you also have knife that basically gets all of sight. If you just throw it here, or even if you hit it against this pillar, that's a little bit harder for them to get. It gets most of the sight here. So it's very difficult for them to use any utility to start pushing you with. So again, I think KO is a really, really good pick here on B. I would really rather see KO played in stairs versus heaven. That's just my take, but wherever you play him, he's very good for keeping them in this back left corner of the site. I think Gecko really does fit the archetype for an initiator to play on any site, so he could play B or A. I really think that he actually does make a little bit more sense over on A, but he is very, very helpful on B and very strong on B as well. On A, I think he's a little bit more helpful because he's very similar to Sova here in this regard, that he can play this smoke a little more confidently as teams are scaling in. So again, imagine they're coming in and they're playing this traditional plant and they're about to start planting. He has the ability to either stop the plant for a little bit with his molly, or he has the ability to flash out of here with his dizzy while the enemy team is focused on taking backside control and they're looking in this direction. And then it goes without saying, he's really strong on defense in particular because he's great in a post-plant situation. His ability to use wingman, again, if they specifically plant right here, his ability to use wingman here is incredible, right? Because now you're putting your team at a much higher conversion rate as wingman is holding, because again, you're only having to focus for the most part on this angle right here. It's very rare that you're going to get pushed in any other direction as they plant here. So again, I think he's very good on defense for that particular reason. So I'll stick with Gecko for attack if we swap the sides. I think Gecko is going to be super strong and is super strong on this map, again, because of his ability to plant on sites where it might be a little bit more contested. That's usually where you're going to see Gecko played the most, is where there's a very highly contested default plant spot. So on Icebox, for example, you're going to see Gecko almost always picked because it's very difficult to get plant down, right? Like the name of the game on Icebox is to stall the plant as long as possible. And so if you can bait out utility at first with just wingman, that's even better, right? And so I think Gecko is going to be really good for using wingman to bait out some of that utility from the defenders so that you can confidently plant without getting killed through some of that utility. And I think that that goes for both B or for A, right? For A, the default plant spot is here. Very easy to spam that from heaven. And so I think getting some of that spam out with wingman first, I think is good, just to see if somebody is playing there. And then you can a little bit more confidently come over here and play it. And even on B, if you're forced in a scenario where you have to plant here on the left lane, sending your wingman out and following him in, I think is okay. Or even sending him here into default and following him in so that you can get the pick on anyone trying to shoot him, I think is also pretty standard. Use his flashes however you want. Again, I'm not getting into the world of specific lineups and specific ways to use a utility and where exactly to hit for the biggest bang for your buck. I think that is something that can be covered in a video that's dedicated to that. And I think there's plenty of guides on how to use any one of these agents on a particular map. But I do want you to understand that Gecko is very strong on this map, and you should, if you're an Initiator main, should be picking him over somebody like Fade, for example. Let's talk about Sova for a second. I think Sova is actually the strongest Initiator on this map. I think he's going to be seen pretty much in every situation that you see in a pro play setting and in ranked. You may not see him in ranked all the time, but he is very strong in ranked. On defense, I already explained why he's so strong. On attack, I think, again, he's very difficult to handle and deal with as a defender. Using that dart into back A at a good time as your team is scaling to take control of that is going to be a huge benefit for your team. And then same thing goes for B, right? Using your arrow in back B here, I think there's a lineup that hits like right here off the map on some of the rocks that are kind of facing off the map here. And it gets all of back B, all of back lane, and I think it even gets some of heaven as well. Using those lineups and using those arrows is going to be super key for you to be able to take control of these maps and these sites in particular. I think Sova is really good for that. And then I think Sova is also actually really good for re-clearing mid. So if you guys are, you know, pressuring B and then you want to come back over here into mid to see if anybody has maybe lurked up and pushed you guys, using his drone over here in mid I think is going to be really important. I think his dart is the most important on sites, and his drone is good for re-clearing mid. Using his drone on site I think is okay, but these sites are so difficult to get any value out of his drone because it's going to have to travel a very long way. If you can maybe get access to back B here, then maybe drone, I think that's okay. And then on A, you can 100% drone out here. Just know that I don't think it's going to reach back A here, and so his dart is really good for that. And then once you have control of site and you're starting to plan, I think using some sort of drone might make a little bit of sense there as well. I think KO is really good on this map as well. And so on attack side, I think his biggest strength here again is to be able to contest this back B area as best as possible for his team. So that means being able to use this fragment to keep them from peeking you as you scale up. That means throwing flashes back here to prevent them from peeking you again. Using your knife back here as well. So that's a huge one. If you can get this knife right here, it's very difficult to break that knife if you throw it at the right angle, like right here against this wall. And that covers all of back B. So any Cypher that's playing back here, which is very common, any KJ that's playing back here, all of their utility completely gone. And that forces them to start over time having to play stairs, which makes your push a little bit easier. Same thing for A. If you're throwing your dart here into main and the heaven is already smoked, look at how much ground it covers on A, right? Anybody that's playing back A, utility is completely gone. So now they're just going to have to take fights. So I think KO is very strong on this map because of that, and because of the way that you want to path your way into sight. He can very confidently make that job a little bit easier. So again, if you throw a fragment back here into back left corner of A, they can't peek you from there now, and so you can scale up. If they toss a couple of flashes back here and they time it correctly, right? That's a big deal, right? They have to time it correctly, but if they time it correctly as your teammates are peeking this corner, you can get very easy picks here. So I think KO is going to be very strong on attack in particular. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you. Hopefully this guide helps you convert some rounds. Let me know if you've got any other tips or ways you'd like to play the map in the comments. As always, subscribe if you like the content and join my Discord if you want to keep the conversation going. Catch you in the next one.